It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We got a really special show for you. Sometimes kind of an outrageous kind of topic. The article is called Dreadful Chronology of Gaddafi's Murder. And our guest is Chris Welzenbach. And it really is an international war crime of what we did over there in Libya and what we've done to this country and how you see it. They're in turmoil over there and chaos over there to this date. And it's amazing that we have a woman running for president who should be on trial for war crimes rather than running for president, just for what went on in Libya alone. Mr. Welzenbach, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell us about yourself. Who is Chris Welzenbach?
Well, I was originally a playwright, worked with Walkabout Theater in Chicago. I had a hit play called Downsize that ran for a couple of years in Chicago, then in translation was produced in Buenos Aires, and then later was translated into Portuguese and was produced in Sao Paulo and in Rio de Janeiro. I fell out of that life, worked on other things. Actually, I had some setbacks in my personal life. I had a blood disease that nearly killed me. Had to sort of retreat to my larger family and recuperate from that. I'm still basically in the process of recuperating from that. So that's where you find me now. I'm now working on other things like journalism, investigating stuff that I'd been thinking about and worried about for a long time, and now I want some answers to these questions.
Gotcha. So I guess you can say that this disease, this illness, was like a blessing in disguise. It gives you time to focus on this kind of work.
Yeah. It had me recharge what I was doing intellectually.
Okay. Well, God bless you with that. I hope you get a speedy recovery. Now, this article.
Right.
The dreadful chronology of Gaddafi's murder. Give us an outline. What happened here?
I first became intrigued by this whole process. I had just done a piece about Chris Hayes, who is with MSNBC, who was another member of Walkabout Theater when I was working there, and he'd gone on to become this host on MSNBC. And I'd read this book by Michael Aria called Medium Blue about the politics of MSNBC. He included a transcript of an interview with Jeremy Scahill, a journalist who's done a lot of research in the Middle East. Scahill was talking about CIA operatives working in Libya prior to coincident with sort of the beginning of the Arab Spring, but prior to any Western involvement in Libya. So they were sort of in there stirring the embers for one reason or another. I became intrigued by why they would be doing that. I then discovered that back in 2007, Muammar Gaddafi had fronted $300 million toward the purchase of a telecom satellite that would free the nations of continental Africa from an annual lease payment of $500 million that they would have to pay for access to a telecom satellite. Now, this basically euchred all these Western banks out of the opportunity for loans and for interest. You're talking tens of billions over time. On just that one deal alone that they got screwed out of. So they were upset about that. As a result of the article that I did about Hayes, a guy in France contacted me, an expatriate American, who said he knew of a lot of information that was now emerging in the French media about Sarkozy's relationship to Muammar Gaddafi. Sarkozy was then president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy.
Sure.
as I started to look into that, I discovered that Sarkozy himself had a very dark and devious background, had been mentored by the mayor of this small town on the Seine that was known as a wealthy burg and was known for its corruption. And this mayor was incredibly corrupt. It was Achille, I can't pronounce his last name, but he took Sarkozy under his wing. Sarkozy is one of those guys like Edwin Edwards from Louisiana, a corrupt guy that people vote for because there's a thing about him. He's a guy who gets away with stuff. Sarkozy had that same thing going on with French politics.
Yeah, Sarkozy always had this reputation of being like a womanizer, right?
Yeah, he'd been through about 4 marriages at last count, and a lot of mistresses on the side. Yeah, everything about the guy like stinks on ice. And it was he who entered into a financial arrangement, according to Mediapart, a French investigative journalistic consortium. They claimed, this came out on September 8th of 2016. They claimed that going back to 2006, Sarkozy was being financed by Muammar Gaddafi. I think Gaddafi could see ahead. He knew that, for example, the purchase of the telecom satellite would provide Africa as a continent a certain independence from the Western powers. And this initially would make Gaddafi a targeted man. Gaddafi had done other things to try and cozy up to the Western powers. For example, he had entered into agreement in 2008 with the U.S. to provide a fund to pay off the victims of what is called the Lockerbie bombing. That was the Pan Am jet that went down over Lockerbie, Scotland.
All right.
Now, that in and of itself, that's kind of a shaky deal, because according to British journalist Robert Fisk, the Lockerbie bombers are still alive and well and doing fine in Beirut. And these guys were hired by the Iranians shortly after the USS Vincennes shot down an Iranian airliner over the Red Sea. This was payback, basically, for that shoot down.
That we've never apologized for, by the way. The U.S. has never apologized for shooting down that Iranian jet.
No, it hasn't.
Yeah.
It certainly hasn't. At any rate, the Iranians wanted their pound of flesh. The Lockerbie boys, these Lebanese guys, provided it. They probably got the bomb aboard at Nicosia in Cyprus. Boom, it goes off over Scotland. Gaddafi and the Libyans likely had absolutely nothing to do with it. But Gaddafi wanted to make good with the West. He wanted to do business with them. He had broad shoulders and deep pockets. So he agreed, I will pay you this ransom to get back in good with you. Now, then comes this notion, following the purchase of the telecom satellite. Gaddafi is then nominated as chairman of the African Council, this overarching body that governs certain aspects of African affairs. And it was then, I believe this is in 2010, he first makes mention of the idea of a United States of Africa with a currency that would be shared by all nations. And the currency would be based on a gold dinar, then the currency of Libya. At this point, Gaddafi had stockpiled about 143 tons of gold in his vaults to support that gold dinar. It would be a gold-based currency. Thereafter, any product of Africa, including Libya's oil, would have to be purchased with gold dinars. This would seriously undercut the European Union's euro, and of course the United States dollar. This and the loss of banking business to the IMF and to the internet and to the World Bank were something that the Western powers couldn't allow for. But more than this, Sarkozy himself, as president of France, had taken about 50,000 euros, to finance his own election for president back in 2007 in France. This is a crime under French law. He could have ended up in prison. He had to eliminate evidence of the crime. When he saw the events militating against Gaddafi, that the big banking houses of Wall Street, London, Amsterdam, etc., were all now focusing in on Gaddafi, he figured this was his opportunity to off this guy, eliminate the evidence of his own criminality, and, basically grab the oil and grab the gold. It was a crime that is, if you look at it, it's really tawdry. It's a crime of snatch and grab, that is, go in there and grab the gold. It's a crime to cover up a previous crime. It's about the lowest kind of crime imaginable. And they tried to cover it up by saying that they were going after some mastermind of terrorism.
Right.
So I'm not sure what your thoughts on all of that are, but I'm a bit outraged.
Let me ask you a question real quick. You're familiar with the WikiLeaks statements?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
how does that fit in?
Okay. WikiLeaks provided the information that Mediapart was able to use in their reports. It was the September 8th, 2016 Mediapart report said that it was WikiLeaks that provided them with the critical information about all of this. Without WikiLeaks, none of this would have come to light.
Well, I know the WikiLeaks. How did the WikiLeaks out Sarkozy? Do you have quotes or anything?
I'm not sure. I don't have that I don't have that information in front of me. I know that they directly said that, hey, this was part of the WikiLeaks information that we were scanning.
Right, because I know,
and I believe that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hillary Clinton. What Hillary Clinton was directly quoted in WikiLeaks, saying, about the financial benefits and the financial opportunities of going in there and overthrowing Gaddafi.
Oh, yeah. She was responding to an email she received from Sidney Blumenthal.
Oh, brother. I
had misidentified him in my piece as Michael Blumenthal for some reason. It was Sidney Blumenthal who said that, look, there's 143 tons of gold that we know of, and probably an equal amount in silver. Further, if we don't move, our banks are going to take it in below the knee. We're really going to be hurting here. And we have to look at Hillary Clinton as representing Wall Street and representing the banks, and not necessarily representing the American people or any other interests. They're the guys who pay her bills. She knows where her bread is buttered.
And what was Sidney Blumenthal's role in this? He's not elected. He's not appointed. He's not a government employee or any kind of.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No. He was simply advising. And Blumenthal is a serious snake in the grass. He has since this time gone over to the far right and has been taking sniping shots, pot shots at the Clintons and at the others. It's like a falling out among thieves. This is pretty ugly, no matter which angle you look at it from. What concerns me the most is that had Gaddafi succeeded in creating a Pan-African currency, Africa, for the first time in 500 years, would have achieved true independence and true freedom. And because of the West acting at the behest of their own banking interests, and because of Sarkozy acting because of his own fear of being discovered as a criminal, all of that got flushed down the tubes. The most prosperous nation in Africa, Libya, has been reduced to a basket case. 400,000 or more people have been forced from their homes. There is now an endless cycle of terror and reprisal. There is it's a failed nation. What used to be an extraordinary success story is now just a wasteland.
Isn't there like a racial genocide going on over there as well?
Yeah. Black Libyans have been targeted by lighter-skinned Libyans, by the various Arab tribes like the Rif and the Tuaregs and whatnot. And that is going on. That's pretty widespread as well now. I mean, it's a horror story. 6 ways from Sunday. I don't think there's an adequate way to sum it all up. You could probably write a book about each and every aspect of what's gone wrong in that country at this point. It's like a replica of what's gone wrong in Iraq. As Tito had done in Yugoslavia, keeping all these various warring factions united as Yugoslavia, Gaddafi had managed to do in Libya. He had created a system whereby he would divide the spoils of all the oil money coming into the country equally among the various tribal units. And he allowed them total autonomy as to how that money, those resources would then be expended. So they had independent nations within or beneath the tent of Libya itself. It was a very unique arrangement. You couldn't call Libya a traditional nation state. It was more an associated states of Libya who would agree on certain national points, without really having a strong central government.
And sort of that was kind of like it was like a model for his plan to do with the whole continent of Africa, to have a United States of Africa. That's a very good way of putting it. You knew it worked.
It worked in Libya for 50 years. Right. Yeah. It could easily have been transferred to the broader continent. And just by producing a gold-based dinar, they would no longer be at the whims and whimsy of the IMF and the World Bank. They would no longer be economic slaves to the Western banking interests.
It always struck me, right? It's just like a personal theory I have. Whenever there's chaos going off in Iraq and Syria and Iran, when there's chaos, there's war, there's bombing going on, there's terrorism going on, it causes the international value, the price of oil, to increase. So it also causes the price and the value of oil to increase that's being pumped out of the ground in Texas and Oklahoma. But the cost for pumping that oil stays the same. So their profits increase dramatically. So if I owned an oil well in Oklahoma, I would want bombs going off over there every day.
That's one way of looking at it. I think another way of looking at it also is globally, in that the U.S. is looking at how Russia and China, particularly China, is moving into these regions. And these are agents of stability. And our foreign policy has always been premised on creating instability so that we could move in with our military, establish military bases or outposts in various regions, and effectively control them in that way. That way, the resources of those regions, because they had no way of controlling them, could then be extracted by our corporations for very little expense. By contrast, when the Russians or the Chinese move in, they do so in a more traditional way. This is a partnership with an existing sovereign state. We're going to be trading equally, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to build bases. We're going to build up trade relationships. This is seen as the big threat by the State Department, I believe.
Now, it's always been my impression that Gaddafi was a popular leader, that the people were happy with him. He had all kinds of programs, like if you got married, you got $50,000 and all kind of free services for his people. Is that your impression as well?
One of the emails, I got a massive amount of feedback on that article. One of the emails was from a professor in Michigan who said that he had a number of students who were exchange students from Libya, and their education was totally paid for by the Libyan state, and they had nothing but good things to say about Gaddafi, about how he was so generous to his people. It brings me to mind of that old movie Lawrence of Arabia, the character played by Anthony Quinn, who says, my people love me because I am a river to my people. In other words, whatever money I have just flows on through to my people. And that apparently is a part of being a ruler in that part of the world. You are seen as a faucet or a font of money that goes out to those beneath you. And how you direct that money is how you are perceived as a leader. So, I think most Libyans were very happy having Gaddafi in there. I think what happened, like I said, the thing that intrigued me at the outset was that the CIA very early on was going in there and stirring up trouble and creating factions where factions hadn't previously existed. And as we see now, those factions weren't real. They didn't really represent the people. And when they fell apart, the nation fell apart. They came up with this. Let me see if I can call it up here. Yeah, they came up with this thing called the National Transitional Council, which was totally bogus. It sounds like something that was created in Langley and had nothing to do with reality, as an umbrella for all these so-called rebel groups fighting against Libya. Well, they may have had guys on the ground, but it was French aircraft, it was U.S. aircraft, it was British aircraft who enforced all of that, who bombed and strafed the opponents and allowed the NTC, or the National Transitional Council, ultimately to win militarily and drive Gaddafi out of Tripoli. But that whole thing was created on the ground. It was fabricated. It was just nothing but a fabric of lies.
Okay, so taking a little step back, if you were to play devil's advocate for the U.S. State Department motivation for overthrowing Gaddafi, is there any justification that they could point to that would have a little bit of credibility in your eyes?
He had been a sponsor of terror, not necessarily the Lockerbie bombing, which is highly, highly questionable, but he had sponsored other things. He deliberately tried to be a gadfly to the Western powers, and he'd done that playing to the theater of his home audience. He was very popular back there. I mean, you're right. For example, when he went to meet Sarkozy in 2007, in the courtyard of the hotel where he was staying, he built a tent, a typical tent for an Arab sheikh in the courtyard. This is the kind of stuff that he loved and the kind of stuff that the West hated. So a guy who's deliberately poking you in the eye, you're going to get like a negative response. But that's really all I can say. It was more greed than anything else. They knew about the gold in his vaults. Mm-hmm. He had too much of it. He was too much of an economic threat.
I believe he did that thing with the tent too in Central Park. Am I correct? When he visited New York?
Wow. I hadn't heard of that.
Or maybe he wanted to. It was in the papers for sure. Something about either he wanted to put a tent or he actually did put up the tent and stayed in Central Park, which is, it's pretty fascinating, Now,
but that's typical Gaddafi, and again, he's playing back to his home theater.
So what was the tipping point and the U.S. justification? This terrorism, or because he was cooperating?
No. Yeah. No, the tipping point was when it looked like he was going to move forward with the Pan-African currency.
Right.
That was something that they just could not tolerate. That's when the French bankers first went to Sarkozy and said, look, we've got a real problem with this guy Gaddafi. He could cost us tens of billions of dollars. What are you going to do? And Sarkozy says to himself, I owe this guy 50,000 euros, and he knows that he paid for my election campaign, which is a felony in France. I could do serious time if it's ever discovered. Ergo, kill two birds with one stone, please the bankers, and eliminate evidence of my own criminality. And that's why he launched the war against Libya.
You mentioned you were friendly with Chris Hayes from MSNBC.
Right.
Now, has he been receptive to reporting on your perception and your chronology of events?
Not at all. My piece about him was largely negative. It was to the effect that the guy that I knew when we were both working with Walkabout Theater was he was a different person back then. He had strong left credentials. He was working for In These Times, which was a left-leaning labor magazine. He worked evidently shoulder to shoulder with Jeffrey St. Clair, the chief editor of Counterpunch. He then went on to be the Washington correspondent for The Nation before going to MSNBC. When he first started at MSNBC, he still was an independent voice, an objective voice, or a voice of reason. And over the years that he's been broadcasting, he's step by step, little by little, gone over to the company position, and he's now basically just another talking head. And in my article about him, I wrote of my sorrow about what had happened, the change that I had seen in him, and why that so bothered and troubled me. And he contacted the artistic director of Walkabout, Kristen Schmidt, but he did not contact me. I think the reason he contacted Kristen is because he knew he'd get a sympathetic ear there, whereas he would not get a sympathetic ear from me or from Jeffrey St. Clair. So that's where our relationship now stands.
Yeah, it's sad. But MSNBC is, when you look at Rachel Maddow and how they just had everything. Clinton tilted against Sanders. And then they got this guy on there, Al Sharpton, who I grew up with, who's an FBI agent, working.
Yeah, he's an informant, for crying out loud.
More than informant. He was making cases for the FBI. He was working for them as an agent. He had a phone in his Trump Tower apartment with that, when you picked up an automatic recording on it, straight to FBI headquarters. Just unbelievable. What passes for the left these days.
I know.
It's heartbreaking. How old are you?
Me, I just turned 60.
60. Okay, I'm 54. Just turned 54. And do you have any kind of hope for the future? What do you think?
I am deeply troubled. We had flooding this fall on the Mississippi River, which has never happened before. We've seen a powerful hurricane in the middle of October hit the East Coast. It seems to me that, I look at future generations, I look at the little kids coming up, and I'm wondering what sort of planet have we left for them? And, in terms of the immediate future, the idea of having to choose between Trump and Hillary Clinton, that's no choice at all. It simply is no choice at all. And I don't know what to say to voters except that you vote locally. You vote on the local issues and keep it at that.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do here in Nevada, because we can't even vote for Jill Stein. They wouldn't even put her on the ballot. The judge was appointed by Harry Reid and one of Clinton's buddies. And then, as you know, us Bernie supporters here were a bunch of chair-throwing maniacs, violent anarchists, which was reported all over MSNBC, even though it wound up on Snopes. Back to Libya. Okay, let's get back to Libya. Oh, my God.
Okay.
Now, these are war crimes. How come there's been no charges against Sarkozy and against Clinton?
I think in Sarkozy's case, given how sneaky that guy is, he probably has the goods, so to speak, on a lot of other big French powerful men, guys in positions of authority who could otherwise harm him. They'll say, you do that to me, I can expose you for doing this. I think he's in that position. He strikes me as like that J. Edgar Hoover type.
Blackmail dirt.
Right. He's dirty. In Clinton's case, it's simply because the system itself has been so corrupted by money and by the banking interests. They control the legislature. They control the judiciary. And with Clinton, they're going to control the executive yet again. So there's no real avenue that the rest of us have to get at her. I mean, otherwise, certainly it would have happened a long time ago. I mean, for her to say, we came, we saw, he died, and this was a legitimate sovereign leader. Right?
Yeah, laughing, smiling. No, listen. Laughing, smiling, clapping our hands. We came, we saw, we killed him. And now, clarify my memory here. Did we also murder his sons, or were they just arrested and tortured?
His one son was killed with him. I think a couple other members of his family managed to get out alive. I'm not certain of the entire details, but I know that one of his kids was killed with him on the 21st of October when they killed him.
Fascinating enough, all this going on openly. There's leaked emails talking about we were going there to take the money. Sidney Blumenthal advising on this just blows your mind. Where does this guy get off advising on this kind of stuff? Just blows your mind. But what's taken over with the Libya story is not these war crimes, not the overthrow and what the horror that's going on in that country, but Benghazi. Benghazi is
right.
is the calling, the war cry from these Republicans. Can you give us any insight on what went on there?
All I know about Benghazi is what anyone else knows, is that the ambassador did not heed State Department directives that he needed more security. He thought he was safe where he was. He thought he had a good relationship with the people he was dealing with and did not perceive the wider chaos. And Stevens, he was a victim of his own hubris in that regard. He actually thought he was on top of the situation when his own intelligence people were telling him, no, you're in real danger here. You've got to beef up security and stuff. So I think ultimately it was on Stevens' own head. He didn't respond adequately to the intelligence information he was given. He did not beef up his own security, and he ended up dying for it. And he ended up killing members of his staff who otherwise should have lived. That's my perception.
The actual militias, the factions that went after and attacked the compound that day, do we know which ones? Have we identified who they are? Are they the same ones that were? Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know. That's the whole problem. You're talking about gangs of men that are liquid, that form and reform, that switch their alliances all the time. Whoever was fighting on this side today was fighting on that side yesterday. You can't get a grasp of that situation. All the CIA managed to do was work as a catalyst to spark these things going. But after that, they, as is always the case in human affairs, they almost immediately lost control of the situation. So the guys who attacked Stevens, who knows? They melted back into the desert. Who knows who these people are? You could tell me just as easily. The State Department doesn't know. The CIA, our best intelligence people don't know who these guys are. We're never going to know.
And these rumors you hear about, Stevens was trying to disarm certain factions and send their arms over to Turkey and anything about?
Oh, I've heard another thing about that. Stevens may have been aware that some of Gaddafi's gold was going to be shipped out through Benghazi, and he was there in an attempt to intercept it. Now, that came out just recently, and I don't think the rumor has any credibility, but it just sort of goes to show how the random killing, and it was a random killing of a U.S. Government official, can be, think Vince Foster, can be twisted and turned any way that different political forces in this country want to twist or turn it. That, I mean, it in and of itself, it means nothing.
It's so, fascinating you would bring up Vince Foster. You got to listen to some of the shows I've done on Vince Foster with some of the eyewitnesses and people involved in that investigation. It's just incredible. And you're right, it just can be twisted any way they want. It always struck me as curious, sort of in the vein of an October surprise, because you remember the election was going on there, and how Mitt Romney held this midnight press conference where he came out, rambled a couple of words, and then ran off the stage. It was very bizarre. And then all of a sudden it's turned into one of the biggest things to take off for years, of one of the biggest congressional investigations ever. Your take on that?
Again, I just see it as political posturing on our end. Maybe Romney realized how tenuous his grip on these facts actually was, and decided to drop what was a hot potato. I really can't give you any information on that.
Now, this
all I know is that Stevens died. It was a regrettable incident, and that's basically the end of it. He was in a situation that was chaotic. The idea of trying to impose a pattern from the outside on that chaos tells you everything about those who are trying to impose that pattern and nothing about the chaotic situation itself. Those who try and say that Stevens was in the middle of this or in the middle of that are looking through the wrong end of the telescope. It should be on them.
Very interesting. Now, this gold, is there any accounting of where it went and where it is now?
None.
Oh, my God.
None. And it's something like $5 billion worth of gold.
If you had a guess, what do you think it is? or who do you think that got their hands on it? You can kind of look at who was behind the invasion. Not the invasion, but the overthrow.
My first thought will always be Sarko in France. But I wouldn't put it past Goldman Sachs or any of the guys on Wall Street either. I mean, they probably had a hand in it, or it could have ended up in Fort Knox.
No, the Clintons.
This is also a very, very real possibility, though I don't think they have the leverage to have pulled that off. I see them as puppets being operated by others, and I think it was the others who probably got their hands on the gold.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, now, as far as this Libyan story, is there anything I've left out that I should have asked?
I've been told that I should have spent more time on the, where is he? Hang on. Yeah, Bernard-Henri Levy, and his, the way he was operating behind the scenes in France. Many of the emails said I should have spent more time on him, and I think I should go back and look into his performance in all this. He's a staunchly pro-Israel and a pro-Zionist political leader in France who never saw a war against the Arabs that he did not love. But in this case, he may have also done other things that were less than legitimate. So that also demands some additional look into.
And this is coming from people like they're trying to send you tips, saying, "Hey, I have inside information. Take a look at this guy." Right.
That's where the same thing about the idea that Gaddafi's gold may have been smuggled through Benghazi. All of these tips started to fly in after the thing got published.
Interesting, because, I've had Cynthia McKinney on the phone a few times, and she's adamant that when she sees these congressional hearings, she says, this is something where all sides in these congressional hearings are covering up for something way bigger than what we're seeing here,
that there's no question of that.
Yeah.
There's no question. Our government is no longer our own.
Yeah, frightening. What are you working on next besides Israel? Besides Libya?
It's on a larger thing about how the media has been distorting U.S. history, and basically the old what's his name, George Orwell thing. He who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the future controls the present. That is how you rewrite history, is how you move forward. Most recently, I'm looking at that movie solely about the retelling of a very recent incident where Sullenberger famously landed a plane on the Hudson River. Great hero.
Right.
And then Clint Eastwood came along, and in the words of a writer for The Guardian in England, says Eastwood effectively weaponized Sullenberger, made him a weapon for the right through a contrived scenario that they are now presenting as history. And the process by which that happens, I mean, I'm going back into other things like Zero Dark 30, which was based entirely on a fabrication. Have you read The Killing of Osama bin Laden by Seymour Hersh?
No, I have not. Seymour.
Okay, that gives you in detail what had actually happened. Okay. And what had actually happened was in 2010, U.S. intelligence discovered that the Pakistanis had been holding bin Laden prisoner since 2006, and they started leaning on the Pakistanis, like, we want to get a hit on this guy, and we want it done before 2012 when the elections come up.
Right.
And finally, they extracted a promise so that the SEALs could go in and do it. And when the SEALs went in, what the Pakistanis had done is they secreted bin Laden in a place called Abbottabad, which was a resort community about 40 miles outside of Islamabad. And because it was a resort community, everybody has a short-term lease, so nobody knows the next-door neighbor. And it was right near a ISI, Pakistani intelligence unit, and it was within 15 minutes flight from a major Pakistani military base. And they had guards inside the compound. I mean, he was a prisoner, but not just a prisoner. He was directly under the eye of Pakistani security and the Pakistani army. And so, as part of the deal that the U.S. brokered, they cut all the power to Abbottabad. They pulled all the guards out of the compound where bin Laden was being held prisoner. And then our guys were supposed to go in there and kill him, extract the body, and then they were supposed to put the body in this mountainous area of Afghanistan. And then a week later, they were going to claim that he had been killed as part of a zone strike, and that would absolve Pakistani military and intelligence leadership of any culpability in the whole shebang. But what had happened is that the SEALs managed to screw everything up like 6 ways from Sunday. Number one, they crash a helicopter. So then they have to destroy the helicopter. They do so with percussion grenades, which wakes up the sleepy resort town. Everybody wakes up looking at fire pouring out of this wreckage. When they go into the compound, they encounter no resistance because there are no guards and no weapons in the compound itself. They manage to blast bin Laden apart. They just empty their clips in him. They gather up the remains. According to Hersh, only his skull was intact at this point. and shoved it all in a body bag. And then they dumped the body bag in the mountainous area between Pakistan and Afghanistan for returning to base. So then the White House has this problem. I mean, Obama goes on the air that night and he says, you know, we went in there, we had this firefight, we killed Obama, we have his body, et cetera, et cetera. The next day they have to create these endless fantasies, like they had to bury him at sea off the USS Carl Vinson. And it's one lie piled on the other. And ultimately, one of these lies or streams of lies is picked up by the producers of Zero Dark 30. And then when the movie came out, that became the truth. That became the reality of what actually happened. And so what my next piece is about is how Hollywood continually rewrites history and presents the U.S. with a very twisted idea of the truth.
Yeah, that's a great topic. You know, they do that in a lot of, even TV movies of the week and stuff like that. They did a movie about the McMartin preschool. They did one about Jeffrey McDonald to like give the official version of what went on, you know, and it's always their whitewashed version. Now, with Sully, though, your concern is about how they make it that the FAA, Well, in the Sully thing, it's the way they crucified the NTSB. Right. And when I was very young and living in D.C., one of the bartenders at this bar that I frequented in Georgetown he was working there part-time, and the rest of the time he worked at the NTSB. And later, after a plane went down in like Central America, I remember about 10 years later, I remember seeing him being interviewed. He was this highly qualified guy, and I had just enormous respect for him. And this movie solely just trashes these people. And that really rankles me, man. These guys do good work, and they save lives. And that shouldn't have happened. Okay, very interesting. So we got a couple of seconds left. What do you want to leave us with? I just want people to be a little more outraged at some of the criminal conduct of their elective leaders. They should hold the people they vote for to a greater accounting than they're presently doing. People have to wake up. Thank you so much, Chris Welzenbach. This article is called Dreadful Chronology of Gaddafi's Murder. I tried to include it in the description of this show. So you're going to have to go to Counterpunch to read the whole thing. Mr. Welzenbach, thank you so much. Thank you. Good night. Funny that he should mention Sully, because I've said it 1,000 times. My former partner was NYPD Harbor Aviation, was the last guy to get off that plane. It wasn't Sully. You know, they got this myth that Sully was the last guy to get off. There's no way that would be allowed. You know, once these NYPD rescue guys, that they're going to let him be the last. That's insane. I don't know why that keeps getting promoted like that. And people were injured in that case as well. Also, too, he was talking about the murder of bin Laden. Very interesting. I had not heard that Seymour Hersh version. Very interesting, because you might remember my interview with Charles Strange and his wife, who were the parents of the third guy in over there at the what do you call that thing, at the compound there. And what was really bizarre about that was this thing with the ramp ceremony, where when those Navy SEALs all were in that crash, that they held this bizarre funeral ramp ceremonies with their coffins at this hangar, where they invited in a local imam. And what he did was he cursed their souls to hell and said, if anybody rises up against Islam, this is what happens. It's on YouTube. You can find it. If you Google a Navy SEAL ramp ceremony, it's there, man. It's very, very bizarre. Okay.